Welcome to the Berkshires Gone By, history and folklore about the westernmost and most beautiful county in Massachusetts. I'm your host, Brooke. Today we visit New Ashford, a small town on the west side of Mount Greylock. There was once a fort that stood on the side of the great mountain long before there was anything else. But when the time came to expand beyond the safety of its walls, the first homestead was constructed by Captain Uriah Mallory in 1794. He earned his title while fighting in the Revolutionary War. He and his wife came from Connecticut a little earlier. Their children were born soon after, George and Uriah Jr. Much later, Uriah Jr. would own his father's farm and will it to his own son, Van Ness Mallory. Van Ness's real first name was probably William, but it seems that he went by his middle name because of the large number of Williams in his family. He married a woman named Janet Jordan, whose name is also spelt as Janet in documents. In June 1861, a young man named Henry Pratt, aged 21, and his even younger wife, Eunice Vanderwalker, aged 16, came to the Mallory's door. They were responding to an ad in the paper. The couple had traveled from Osceola, New York to Pittsfield, then walked the way north to New Ashford. After talking a short while, Van Ness and Janet hired Eunice as a housemaid and Henry as a farmhand. The pair claimed that the young girl's family didn't like Henry and that they'd eloped. Janet, however, didn't believe the tale and soon discovered the truth. The couple was not married. Unwilling to keep them under her roof while they lived in sin, she hurried them to the closest justice of the peace, a man named Phineas Harmon. Weeks later, Eunice's father, John Vanderwalker, still hadn't given up on finding his child. He'd been asking around and had managed to follow their trail to Pittsfield. On July 29th, he'd arrived there and told his plight to a policeman named Selden Y. Clark, and hired him to bring him up to the Mallory home. When they arrived, though, Henry tried to avoid his new wife's angry father, but there was no escaping him. John Vanderwalker confronted the young couple in front of the small gathering, the Mallorys, and Officer Clark. It was then that they all learned that Henry wasn't just Eunice's husband. He was also her uncle, her mother's own brother. Yes, marrying a relative wasn't completely uncommon at the time, and their ages weren't terribly far from each other. But by this era, it was becoming more and more taboo to marry a cousin, let alone an uncle or aunt. That was pretty much completely off the table. Her father John pleaded with her to come home, but Eunice told him that she was happy and married and didn't want to leave. John then turned a young man that was now not only his brother-in-law, but also his son-in-law, and they argued for a time, shouting and gesturing at each other. But her father would not be put out by a petulant kid. After a while, when it began to seem that Henry wasn't getting anywhere, he took his young wife a few steps away, and they spoke privately for a moment. It seemed to everyone present that the pair had decided to give in. They held each other as they climbed the stairs to get Eunice's things. John asked that someone go with them. Janet Mallory obliged and found the girl crying. She told her that it was best that she go back to her mother, Dolly Vanderwalker, and kissed her on the head. With the others standing on the stairs and in the hall just outside, Henry returned and told them all to leave for a moment, perhaps to say goodbye to his little wife in private. But the look that he gave Janet sent chills down her spine. They all left the young couple alone. Downstairs, as time ticked away, John became frustrated with his daughter's delaying, and Janet remembered something that Eunice had said weeks ago. So when John asked her to go back up and check on them, she said that she would not, for Eunice had said that she'd die before she went home with her father. John then asked Officer Clark to see to it. At the top of the stairs he could hear gurgling sounds, and forced the door down. The Berkshire County Eagle, August 1st, 1861 read, Mr. Clark went up and found the pair lying on the bed, she with her throat cut ear to ear, and Pratt with his badly mangled, having partially severed the windpipe, but missing the great arteries by a distance of about 1/8 of an inch. The lovers were so closely clasped that the strength of 3 men barely sufficient to separate them. Henry's pocket knife had done the trick. The couple had only been married for 3 weeks. Eunice was dead indeed. But they somehow kept Henry alive. When he finally regained consciousness, he whispered best he could, "She wished us to die together." Henry had to be locked away in the house for his own safety. Woodcutters who'd been in the forest behind the home heard quickly of the killing and threatened to string Henry up. The sheriff arrived before they could get their hands on him. Henry Pratt was brought to Lenox and held there. His trial took place on May 19th, 1862, in the old courthouse. He was defended by well-known Pittsfield attorney Samuel Bowerman. It was at this trial that Janet Mallory recalled again the words of Eunice when the girl told her that she'd never go back, that she'd rather die. Henry's attorney tried to convince the court that Eunice may have slit her own throat. When the verdict was read, Henry was inconsolable and had to be propped up. He refused to look anyone in the eye. "Guilty" was read. A reporter wrote, "His agitations and sobs and utter prostration moved the court and spectators to the deepest sympathy. Men used to all scenes of a criminal court say that they were never witnessed one like this and hope to never witness another." Pratt was sentenced to death, but that never happened. Instead of being taken down to Gallows Hills on West Street, he was given life in prison, or, it's thought, maybe even pardoned after a time by the governor. That's all we really know about Henry Pratt. It's difficult to follow his trail from here, and Henry Pratt's a surprisingly common name in the Berkshires. Eventually, the Vanderwalkers moved from Osceola, New York, to Randolph, New York. Their youngest daughter was old enough to marry, and her parents, her husband, and his father all lived together on a farm. Where should you go if you want to see some of this history in person? Well, Eunice is still in New Ashford, and she always will be. She's buried at the end of Cemetery Road in the New Ashford Cemetery, along with many of the Mallory ancestors and descendants. Her short life didn't leave much behind, not even a gravestone. It's long since gone. It did leave this story, though. That has survived the ages. And one photograph of her. She was an average-looking girl. Looked like any neighborhood child. Her rectangular face featured a button nose, wide-set eyes, straight brows, and a small, thin-lipped mouth. Her dark hair was pulled back and parted straight down the middle. Her off-the-shoulder dress is probably black, but the photo is, of course, in black and white, so it could be any dark shade of any color. She is shown wearing a necklace, a bracelet, and her hands are resting atop each other. But what's more interesting than looking into her eyes is what's written on the back, because no matter how many times a story has been told, there's always another version, and one has been penned here. On the back of the photo, there's a slightly slanting cursive script, written, judging by the terms used in the story itself, by a grandchild of Eunice's father, in other words, Eunice's nephew or niece. It says, Eunice C. Vanderwalker, daughter of John J. and Dolly Pratt Vanderwalker, from 9/30/1844, in the towns of western Oneida County, state of New York. Died July 29, 1861, age 16 years, 9 months, 21 days, in the town of Ashford, county of Berkshires, state of New York. I'll interrupt to say that this person got that little bit wrong. It is, of course, the state of Massachusetts. But the writer continues, was infatuated with her own uncle, brother of Dolly Pratt Vanderwalker. Her father forbid them to meet. They went to a hotel intending to marry. Grandpa John J. Vanderwalker, her father, went there to get her to come home. As she was coming down the stairs, her uncle Lover, there's a space here with an underlined question mark, and then the writer continues, Pratt, shot her. He received a life sentence. She was sister to the mother of Walter Castler. I haven't found any relationship between that last name of Walter Castler in this case, however. The details differ, but the results were the same. The trial took place in the old Lenox Courthouse. This building now serves as the beautiful Lenox Library. The basement is open to browsers now, but was once a jail. When I was a schoolchild in the mid-1980s, we were taken on a tour of the basement before its renovation to see the historic cells that confined criminals long ago. This is where Henry would have been kept. As for the Mallory homestead, on Mallory Road, of course, in New Ashford, the town's children used to tell ghost stories, tales about a young bride seen wandering the yard or within the old house, looking for her love that never crossed the divide to be with her. Witnesses said that the bloodstains were never able to be scrubbed from the floor. The Mallorys eventually passed away. They died in 1905 and 1906. They're up on the cemetery hill with Eunice. The house began to crumble without them. On December 16th of 1930, a cold and biting night, the heat of fire lapped the big old house, and it soon fell to the flames. The cellar hole and the fireplace are all that's left, but those remains were well preserved. A sign reads, Site of original Mallory homestead, circa 1770. A word of advice, though, please refrain from walking in or around it. It is located on private property, and wouldn't it be a shame if the landowner were to get sick of tourists trampling their lawn and put up a big fence? Besides, it's perfectly visible from the side of the road. On the topic of the remains of the house, the Springfield Sunday Union wrote on December 28, 1930, 14 days after the fire, Nobody wants it for a monument to the only murder in the history of the town, and someday it will crumble and disappear. But maybe we do. It's an important reminder to the young. Most of us remember the overwhelming feelings of our first love. Looking back, it's easy for many people to describe those feelings as blinding and desperate. Eunice and Henry let those emotions get the better of them, and it cost them their family and their lives. We are reminded that young love is often very stupid, and like Romeo and Juliet, it's not so much a love story in the end. Rather, it's more just pure tragedy. This has been The Berkshires Gone By, created, written, directed, and read by myself, Brooke Renier, and co-produced by Deanna Garner. We hope you will join us for our next episode. Thank you for listening.